everybody. Is there anything more British than playing chicken with the weather? I don't think so. Today I am out in a Lotus Elise with the roof in the boot, and in about 60 minutes hail is due. But right now it's not here, and I am determined to have a good time. More than that, I'm going to be talking about the Lotus Elise and why, when buying mine 8 years ago, I made a fundamental mistake. And hopefully at the end of this video you'll understand and maybe be able to avoid. So then, what exactly is it that I'm driving today? Well, this is a member of the second generation of Lotus Elise, the S2. More specifically, this is a 2003 Lotus Elise 111S. Now, the Elise, I am sure you are already familiar with. Lotus is a lightweight, aluminium chassised wonder child that arrived in the mid-90s and caused something of a storm when it did. However, though today, with the Elise now having been formally retired after more than a quarter of a century of faithful service, forging itself a genuine legend in the process, there are many who don't realise that was almost not the case, because the Series 1 Elise, mighty and much loved in its day though it may have been, was a car almost doomed from the beginning, because come 2000 and new regulations meant that it was a car that Lotus were no longer going to be able to sell. However, one of the problems with the Elise, something that I have cited on many occasions, is that though it was a popular car, because of the incredibly labour-intensive nature of its construction, it didn't actually ever make Lotus that much money. And so, at the turn of the millennium, when they needed to replace it, they didn't have the funds to do that themselves. And had General Motors not intervened, that is when the Elise story would have ended. And I suspect Lotus along with it not too soon after. But happily, that's not how things went at all. General Motors, for whatever reason, found themselves also wanting a nice, lightweight and affordable sports car, and so they went to Lotus and said, okay, tell you what, we'll lend you the money to redevelop the Elise chassis, and what you'll owe us is a version that we can sell. The car that became the Vauxhall VX220, aka the Opel Speedster. They were both built on the same production line over at Hethel, just outside Norwich. However, the two cars, though at heart sharing the same chassis, are actually quite different, if for no other reason than their choice of engines, which for the Vauxhall and Opel variant was of course a GM unit, first naturally aspirated and then soon after turbocharged. But Lotus initially stuck with the venerable Rover K-Series. And I say venerable there, and I think a lot of people would think that I actually mean vulnerable, because if you mention unreliable engines to anybody, in the list they give you, you will find the Rover K-Series. It is famous throughout the world for head gasket issues, but it does have a lot of upsides too, including the fact that it is very compact, very lightweight, and makes good power for its size. It is one reason it was so loved in not just the Lotus, but also Caterham community too. And so, already being familiar with the engine, for the first of the Series 2s, Lotus simply carried over the old power plant, initially in 1.8 litre, 120 horsepower guise. However, there was an issue. Even for the older Series 1 car, which in reality weighed just over 700 kilos, there were many who believed that just wasn't enough power. The Series 2 already weighed a fair bit more, this particular one being just over 800 kilos. And humorously, I do have a website that I use where I cross-reference manufacturer claimed weights with real measured ones. And for this exact car, oh you devils, they've been resurfacing this road, and yesterday this patch hadn't been done. No! I'm so sorry, Russ, I'm so sorry, but I think we're going to get away with it. Anyway, this car, Lotus claim 811 kilos. My guys measured it at 806. And it is very unusual just for a manufacturer's claim to be simply accurate. It is extraordinarily rare, nearly unheard of, for the actual car to weigh less than what they state. So that's good. regardless, in spite of its still reasonably impressive power-to-weight ratio, there were plenty of people out there for whom 120 horses was just not enough. In its original guise, the Elise had been sold with power figures up to 190 horses, and I recently drove an Elise Sport 160, which was a fabulous, fabulous thing. This actually is also a 160 horsepower car, and curiously it uses a very, very similar engine, the 1.8 litre K-Series, although this has the VVC version for variable valve timing, whereas the old Sport 160 used parts of this engine, but not all of it, including the variable valve timing bit. I must say, as soon as this car rolled into the car park this morning, I was absolutely amazed to see how good a condition it was in. The previous owner to Russ had owned this for 8 years. It's not even on super low mileage, just under 58,000, which in Elise terms is sort of in the middle really. Even so, both the exterior and interior, they've been very, very well cared for. It's also nice to see a car which has, I believe, the touring package, so you've got a little bit of extra leather here, you've got some carpets, and it does make the place feel just a little nicer. My later release, which we'll get onto in a second, didn't feel anywhere near as nice. That was a car which had no options whatsoever. Fun fact for you, that included not having electric windows. Mine were windy ones, workout windows in British parlance, and they're actually heavier than the electric ones. Not by much, like a couple of 100 grams or something, but that car having no options, when I was coming to sell it, I thought, how do I package this in a way that sounds appealing? Because in any other car it wouldn't. And I thought, I'll play Lotus owners at their own game, and I called it the Purist Spec, and it worked. It's in France now, apparently. And now that I've mentioned it, let's talk about that car, my old Elise, and the mistake that I think I made. At a quick glance, it appears to be exactly the same as this. It's a Series 2 in ardent red. The one and only thing that I was really set on when it came to buying an Elise was that it had the short roof. You see, the early Series 2 Elise had what they call the long roof, which basically is the same as on the Series 1, so not only does it cover this, it also goes a little bit further back, and it is considerably more complicated to attach. This one, far more elegant, far easier, and crucially, you can also put it on and take it off from within the car. But beyond that, I wasn't fussed about exactly which Elise it was that I wound up buying. I knew already that there were two different engines available for the Elise. You could have either the Rover K-Series or a Toyota, and though I already knew of the Rover's reputation, I really wasn't all that fussed about it. And the general consensus from people seemed to be that the Rover is cheap to fix when it breaks, but the Toyota will be expensive to fix if it breaks. And nearly a decade later now, I have found out that there are many situations in which the Toyota engine can and will go wrong. Now, I didn't really want the plain Elise with its 120 horsepower, so I discounted that fairly early. And that left me with the budget that I had, about £18,000, a choice really of two. Either this, the 111S, with its Rover engine and just under, actually, 160 horsepower, 158, I think if you want to be specific, and some 129 pounds-feet of torque, 175 newton-meters. Or I could get the Toyota-engined 111R, which has 190 horsepower from its very, very peppy 1.8, which has VVTLI, Toyota's answer to Honda's VTEC. That revved to just over 8,000 RPM. And I thought, yeah, that sounds like a bit of me. Bear in mind, I already had the Evora 400 at the time, so I didn't want the Elise to feel too lethargic. The Toyota cars also came with a Toyota gearbox, as opposed to the Rover one here, I think the PG1, and this is a 5-speed and the Toyota a 6. So taking all of that into account, the greater power, extra gear, and probable better reliability, I thought the Toyota was really the obvious one to go for. But because of this, they did command an obvious premium of not too much, about £2,000 or £3,000, but they were still, like for like, the more expensive car. If if you happen to be watching from the United States, you may be sat there thinking, well, I've never seen an Elise with a Rover engine in it. And that is because one of the reasons that Lotus went with the Toyota engine was to homologate it for the federal market. And the Rover engine wasn't at that point homologated, but the Toyota was. I have seen a few people say, well, there's no real reason that Lotus couldn't have used the Rover lump because it would have passed all the relevant tests. I think the reality is that for Lotus to get the Rover engine through all of the relevant tests, it would have cost an awful lot of money. It just made sense to go for the Toyota unit. And let us not forget that while all of this was happening, MG Rover was in the process of collapsing. So had Lotus hedged their bets and homologated the Rover engine, well, come 2006, they would have basically run out of them, which would have been very bad indeed, so they likely would have had to have gone with the Toyota regardless. So I got my 111R, really enjoyed it, had it for about a year or so, and then sold it. But all the time I had it, there were a few things that just bugged me about the car. And by the time I came to part with it, I was pretty certain that I'd bought the wrong one. And all along, what I should have got was this, the 111S. However, until today, I've not actually been able to drive one to see whether I was right or wrong. So, now we conveniently are just about to hit one of my favourite sections of B Road, a slice of tarmac that is perfect for any Lotus. Let's put my theory to the test. If you are into the business of driving, the interaction between man, machine, and road, and you haven't driven a Lotus Elise, please make it your mission in life. Get out there, drive one, do whatever you have to, beg, borrow, don't steal, please, don't steal, but please do at least consider things that you may think initially you would regret, because I assure you, you won't. These are sensational. From that manual steering, which is the gold standard for feel, to that light, agile, nimble chassis that just turns in whenever you want it to. Even though this is sat on a set of Yokohamas that are a little bit too old for my liking, it is a terrible auto journalist's cliche, but this car really is telepathic. It does exactly what you want it to. It feels like an extension of you. And that sounds like a description of every Elise, doesn't it? But what is it that was so wrong with mine? Well, there were three things, really. First off, the engine. Now, it went to just over 8,000 RPM, but it only came on cam at 5,800. And mine only came on cam at 5,800 because somebody had put in a different ECU. Without that, it would have come on cam at just north of 6,000. And to put it simply, if you didn't take that car to the absolute limit in every gear when you changed, it would have dropped out of the power band. And if you were below that sort of 6,000 RPM marker, it just didn't have all that much verve in it. And the changeover, oh my, it's one of the most brutal I've ever felt. The crossover of a K-Series Honda, for example, is a totally different experience. Yes, you feel it, but in the Elise, it's almost like a two-stroke coming on song. For my Honda friends, it's more like an old B-Series engine. That's what it felt like. And this meant that for a lot of the time, it was just frustrating because you don't want to have to max it out in every single gear. And I know plenty of internet commentators will be keen to say, oh, but that's the whole point of it, you rev it out every single time. Well, yeah, that's great, but if you're trying to make an overtake or something like that, or you're just trying to enjoy a certain piece of road, you can't always be in max gear at every single opportunity. Sometimes there's a corner in the way, sometimes you've got to try and judge things. You don't want to have to change gear mid-overtake. There's lots and lots of things to consider when you're driving, and it became a chore in the end. It also didn't help that every time you did go to change gear, you were reminded that the gearbox wasn't that nice. Very, very vague and woolly, very un-Toyota-like, and I'm sure probably more to do with what Lotus had done rather than Toyota, but it was horrid. It also was basically impossible to heel and tow in the thing. Now, this is similar in that regard. I can rev match pretty easily, but heel and tow, it's just not happening. I've put my driving shoes on today, and I think there I made a mistake. I should have put my regular trainers on, much wider, and I might actually then have been in with a shot. But my 111R, it wasn't just that which was an issue, it was the brake pedal itself. Very horrid, very squishy, had a huge amount of dead travel, a well-known issue in those early cars. Now the Toyotas were servo-assisted, this is not, but it doesn't need it. It's beautiful, great feel. You can modulate this thing with perfect precision. Wonderful car. And I'm not really going that fast, but the joy of an Elise always was the fact you didn't have to. You could really enjoy yourself even when you were doing 5 or 6 tenths, and then when you did decide to kick its head in and give it 9 or 10 tenths, you still weren't going that quick, but you were having an absolute riot. Something incidental that I didn't like about my 111R, which isn't the car's fault, was the fact a previous owner had also fitted it with a Larini exhaust. And at 70 mile an hour with the roof on, that droned something awful. When you were on it, it sounded really good, but that wasn't enough, and always irked me. Before I sold the car, I had actually bought a genuine Lotus exhaust to replace it, which I then supplied with the car. And when I got it, I thought that I'd been done over, because on it was stamped the words, "For track use only, not for road." And so I thought someone had sold me some weird off-brand thing, and so I consulted the Lotus forums, and I was told, no, that's the correct exhaust. They all say that on them. Yeah, gotta love Lotus, right? This one has a Yan Speed on it, a very popular aftermarket upgrade, and it's nice. It's probably a little too loud for daily usage. In fact, it sounds louder in here than it does out there. And Russ does drive this daily. It is his third Elise. He originally had a Series 1 back in the day when they were a new thing. He later had a Series 2, but family arriving meant that he needed a series of more practical cars, including a number of different hot hatches, and then most recently he had a Seat Leon, which he really liked and he wanted to keep, but apparently his lease agreement wouldn't let him. So he thought, okay, we've already got another more practical car in the family, I'll have something fun. And so he's come back to an Elise, and he's brought it to me. So cheers for that. The other modification made to this car is another very common one. The suspension has been replaced with a set of Nitron Street Series dampers, which when he got the car, Russ then went through and set to his preferences. It apparently previously was on the firm end of things, and a lot of people do that, but to me that's just daft. It's a Lotus. It should work with the road. It doesn't weigh that much. It doesn't need to be that stiff. And this is maybe still a little firmer than I'd like, but also not anywhere near enough of an issue that if I owned this car, I'd be out there putting different dampers on. And apparently you can no longer get the Street Series, which is a shame, because as you would gather from their name, this is where they work the best. So then, to summarise, the trio of problems that I had with my Elise 111R. An engine that was Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde in its character, and frankly, somewhat annoying whichever one it was. A gearbox that was just a little bit floppy, vague, and not particularly enjoyable, and a brake pedal that was just, well, limp and very annoying. There is an ABS in this, as I've just demonstrated, and does the 111S fix all of that? Yes, it does. Now I may be changing up here at the point where the old engine was coming on cam, but that means I've already been enjoying it for a lot longer. Put your foot down at even 3,000 RPM and it feels like it's got something. It is also worth mentioning that those Toyota engine cars also carried something of a weight penalty. They were some 60 to 70 kilos heavier than these, and in an Elise, you do notice that. I remembered if you had a big lunch, you would feel it in the car's performance. This, though, it's just more natural. Though it has variable valve timing, it's much smoother, more linear, makes it a very, very enjoyable thing to drive, no matter how hard you want to drive it. The gearbox also, and I have a love-hate relationship with this Rover box as much as I do many Toyotas, but it is better than the Toyota one. You can tell that they had been using it for a while, and I'm sure this particular car being in fine fettle helps, but it is just nicer. Yeah, okay, there are only the 5 ratios to choose from, but in all honesty, even the Toyota with its 6, well, it buzzed its head off at motorway speeds anyway. And the biggest change of all, well, that for me is the brake pedal, because where before it was utterly horrid, now it's a highlight of the car. So, for that reason, I stick by my theoretical recommendation of buying a 111S over a 111R. But I know what you're thinking. You'll have looked at Auto Trader already, and you'll have had the same issue that I have, where you'll have gone, okay, yeah, cool, I hear what you're saying, James, but while this does command only a small premium over the regular 120 horsepower car, and therefore is a no-brainer, the same could be said for the R, which of course is much quicker and more reliable and has a 6th gear and is maybe only another $2,000. If you find a higher mileage one, maybe it's even the same price as the 111S you're looking at, maybe even lower. But trust me on this one, please, trust me. This is the one to buy. Now, I say this knowing that the other day I drove a Series 1 Sport 160 and I said it was the best Elise I had ever driven. And that's still true. But this is a much better car to live with. It feels a huge leap on in terms of the way the interior is put together, in terms of everything. Though by just about any other metric, it's still a little bit Heath Robinson in here. It's actually really, honestly, quite a bit nicer put together. And do notice it. And that Sport 160, brilliant though it definitely was, you want to buy one of those now? You're talking £40,000 to £50,000. One of these, less than 20, and it's still an Elise, a proper Elise. So, there we have it. You want to buy yourself a Lotus Elise, you got 20 grand, don't worry, because you can already afford what is the second best of all of them, this one. If you want to spend a little bit more money, go get a Series 3 or the later supercharged examples of these, but honestly, the Elise to me, it was never about speed, ever. And when they tried to make it faster, all that really happened was they showed up a few of the car's other shortcomings. In this, though, you're not really going to find them so easily. So, there we have it. All that remains to be said is a big thank you to Russ for bringing his car out, and as ever, to you for watching. Don't forget to hit the like button, comment down below, subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you for the next one. I think I might have to put the roof down now. Bye-bye.